This is the portable version of Dark Souls we've been waiting for. The Switch release was delayed by several months, a wait that led to concern over the state of the port. But developer Virtuos Studio has risen to the challenge with what's essentially a robust adaptation of the last-gen original. It's missing the visual features of the remastered edition on PS4 and Xbox One, like the revised lighting, fog effect and animated grass, but it still impresses on its own terms. At its core, this is the Dark Souls you originally played back in 2011, now running at an improved frame rate, a higher resolution, with an increase to 6 players online, amiibo support, and of course, the ability to play it all on a handheld. Some of this we should have seen coming. The game weighs in only 3.9GB on Switch, compared to the 7.5GB when installed on PS4 and Xbox One. It's the same size as the original PS3 or Xbox 360 editions for reference, a profile that helps it squeeze onto a cartridge. Virtuos has also opted to keep the original textures, shaders and effects from that last gen version too, which no doubt aids in keeping that install size in the same ballpark. Side by side with the 360 version, it's clear there's very little between them in terms of the core visual feature set. If it's the authentic Dark Souls you want, as it was presented back in the day, then this is the version for you, although there are some caveats. Switch is capable of much more than this though. As a console experience, it pushes the boat out in resolution, striking a full-blooded 1920 by 1080 while docked under a TV. Unlike the 360 original, which rendered the game natively at 1024 by 720, the resolution metrics make Switch more competitive with the PS4 and Xbox One's 1080p. There is a catch here though. Most of the Undead Berg section runs at this top pixel count with no issue, but for any of the later, more taxing areas, the Switch version dynamically adjusts its resolution. The lowest I've caught is in the Darkroot Basin, a foggy woodland area that forces the game to run at a near constant 1600 by 900 resolution. The setup is simple then. There are two resolutions while docked, 900p and 1080p depending on the scene. It's unlike the PS4 or Xbox One releases in this way, and image quality does take a hit. If you look close you can faintly see the changeover. Even so, it's an easy fix that helps the game target 30 FPS, something I'll cover in more detail later in this video. That's the docked experience, but what about the portable mode? Well, the good news is there are zero visual cutbacks compared to playing docked. All the assets, effects and that Havoc physics engine stay untouched while on the go. The one perhaps inevitable difference, well, Switch renders it at a native 1280 by 720 to match the pixel dimensions of its display. It looks sharp, and even here, it exceeds the resolution of the last gen releases with their cut down 1024 by 720. A key point here is that there's no sign of dynamic resolution scaling while in handheld mode, from what I've seen anyway. In the Darkroot Basin, you're still staring at a 720p image with no loss in fidelity, and the same goes during boss battles. Given the GPU power available to Switch while portable, it's great to see it fixed to 720p. Consider the stats. The console's GPU clock is set to 968MHz while docked, but as a handheld, it goes down to numbers like 307MHz to preserve battery life. Assuming these are the clock states used by Virtuos, that's 39% of the GPU power set aside for the handheld experience. CPU clocks and memory speeds stay the same either way, but the fact is, at 720p, Dark Souls is still only dropping to 44% of that max 1080p resolution, which isn't entirely in step with the drop in GPU power. Still, it does suggest that 720p is enough to make up for the difference in GPU power, and the bottom line is, the game looks great even on the move. That's the situation on Switch, but what are we missing? Reining in the PS4 version as an example of the full remaster, it's clear we are missing quite a bit visually. For starters, there's no revised lighting, meaning Switch's specular highlights and textures appear exactly as they did in the 360 original. Ambient lighting in hallways is back to the original style as well. Bonfires don't cast light across doorways either, as they do in the remaster. But the upside, if you didn't like the changes in lighting for the remaster, this Switch version is the more authentic take on the experience we played back in the day, only now at a higher res. There are other aspects that are missed though, and represented an improvement on PS4. For example, Switch doesn't inherit the animated grass textures, and they stay static just like the last gen versions. Camera motion blur is completely missing too, and the best you get is a slight banding effect on a weapon's arc as you hit R1. And of course, that volumetric fog effect that was revised on the PS4 Remaster is reverted back to the standard effect on Switch. It's really a matter of preference which you preferred. Certainly PS4 looks more complex, but Nintendo's handheld still produces a pleasant effect across doorways. Otherwise, Switch is producing a very respectable image. It matches or exceeds 360 here, while expectedly falling short of PS4 and Xbox One. However, there is an exception to this, and Switch has difficulty handling effects in particular. Check out the fire blast from the Red Wyvern on the bridge, and there's a considerable drop in alpha effects resolution, down to around 400p judging by the edges nearby. It's a huge drop in quality next to PS4, and even the 360 edition produced a high quality effect. This is a unique compromise on Switch. Equally, fire shaders in the Quelaag boss battle are simply changed. It's closer to the effect on the 360 version, but again with a lower quality haze surrounding it. Effects and shaders are worse for wear on Switch, and it does stick out on the big screen. As a portable experience though, the paring back of effects doesn't show up as obviously, and it is passable. One more point to cover. You'll recall the PS4 and Xbox One versions don't render effects like the lens flare on first encountering the dragon. Unfortunately, Switch carries this same baggage, and that lens flare doesn't appear at all during docked or portable play. Another odd glitch is the fact Switch doesn't render the moon overhead during the Great Wolf Sith battle, which is a quirk on PS4 Pro and Xbox One X versions too. Nothing game breaking, but these are embellishments that are clearly missed. There are a few other strange design choices on Switch. One real mindbender is that the A and B buttons are reversed in function for confirming and cancelling. What this means is you'll use B to confirm and A to cancel in any in-game menu, while the front end elements like text entry for your character name involve the exact opposite. It's very confusing. Understandably, it keeps the button positions consistent with the other versions of Dark Souls. If you can imagine you have a DualShock or 360 controller in your hand as you play, everything is mapped identically for the in-game menus. But on Switch, it's just inconsistent with how every other game plays, and indeed how the system front end works. Next, there's the audio quality. The sound, notably on voices or delicate instrumentals, takes a big hit in clarity on Switch. The intro movie file shows how the voice quality should sound, but once we move to the in-game engine, an aggressive compression kicks in that makes it sound muffled. Even the last-gen versions have much higher quality audio than Switch, despite the similar 4GB game size. So let's do a quick one after another comparison. I'll play the intro voice track on 360 first, and then on Switch. It's not an issue playing through the Switch's speakers, but on a TV, and especially headphones, this does stick out.
The undead are corralled and led to the north. Where they are locked away to await the end of the world. The undead are corralled and led to the north. Where they are locked away to await the end of the world.
On the plus side then, Switch runs the 360 version at a higher resolution, but with the downside of degraded effects and audio. With those points in mind, there is still one positive in frame rate. Switch runs with full VSync engaged, with 30 FPS as a target, and it's reasonably well met a majority of the time, and a big improvement over Xbox 360. A quick tour of Blighttown by comparison shows Switch handles one of the most demanding areas with only the occasional frame hiccup. It's not perfect, but certainly adheres to 30 FPS much more tightly in regular play. The second point here is on frame pacing. Maybe we should have seen it coming, but the 30 FPS cap here has an issue, causing the reading on left to alternate between 16.7 milliseconds and 50 milliseconds, whereas really it should be a constant 33.3 milliseconds. Dark Souls fans will be all too familiar with this erratic feeling to camera movement. It's a problem on the 360 and PS3 too, and even Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3 on current gen consoles. It's a shame the engine's approach to the 30 FPS cap is unchanged, and even with Virtuos at the helm here, it still exhibits this glitch. All of this shows the game played while docked, but of course pairing Switch with current gen rivals like PS4 and Xbox One doesn't shine it in the best light. We knew it'd be a 30fps experience compared to the 60 on those, and it's clear which is the one to pick for the under TV console experience. Still on its own terms, it's a respectable turnout, and the Sif boss battle later on, you're getting some issue holding 60fps on those base consoles, whereas Switch seems to drop only slightly from that 30fps target. In essence, it's a realistic number for Switch to shoot for given the hardware, while Xbox One for example can sometimes fall short of the mark a bit with 60 as a goal. With all that said, the most intensive gameplay can cause Switch to struggle to hold 30fps while docked. Virtuos tried to nip this in the bud with the dialed back effects and shaders, but those elements can still cause Switch to drop to near 20fps. On the whole, travelling the world keeps to the 30fps line pretty consistently, no doubt helped along by the dynamic res, but peak action like this shows there are limits to Switch's playback. Generally speaking though, Switch's performance is still far superior to the last gen consoles, which at worst could go to the single digits. The last question then, how about Switch's portable performance? For some, this will be the main attraction. Again, using our modified Switch to capture the portable feed, we can see just how it stacks up. 30fps is still the dominant figure while running across Lordran. Without question though, there are more regular drops to the low 20s while playing in the handheld mode, mainly isolated to the peak stress points. You get low 20fps readings in the same boss battles, and clearly this is a less smooth experience. But overall, I'm still impressed by how similar the reading is between them most of the time. Dark Souls works as a handheld experience in general. Performance is in the 20 to 30fps range mainly for boss battles, but it's not compromised for a bulk of the experience which runs at 30fps. Switch's take on Dark Souls is a mixture of good and bad, but on balance it's still a success. The main disappointment is the dropped audio quality, which is glaring if you prefer to play with headphones. Otherwise, jump into this version expecting the original 360 or PS3 experience, tuned up to run at a more solid 30fps and a higher resolution, 720p or a dynamic 1080p. It's hard to argue with the approach Virtuos has taken in this sense, bearing in mind it's the first version designed specifically for portable play. At last, and months on from the PS4 and Xbox One remasters, we can see how Switch had to be compromised to make this happen. Even with all that in mind, it's still a great effort. Dark Souls on Switch is still as much of a joy to play as it was back in 2011. Anyway, that's all from me. If you did enjoy this analysis, feel free to like or subscribe to support what we do, and don't forget to hit the bell to get notifications as soon as a video lands. For the source file to this analysis, you can check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net. Meanwhile, we're on Twitter if you want to get in direct contact. But from me for now, thanks for watching.